wheels of the stagecoach groaned against the rutted dirt road, each jolt sending Clara Whitmore's stomach lurching. She tightened her arm around Tommy, her 6-year-old son sleeping fitfully against her shoulder, his small face flushed from the Wyoming heat. Through the dust-caked window, she watched Boston fade further into memory with every mile. 3 months ago, she'd been a seamstress in a cramped tenement, counting pennies and praying for miracles. Now she was a mail-order bride, heading toward a future as uncertain as the vast, empty horizon stretching before them. "Ma'am, we'll be reaching Bitter Creek Station within the hour," the driver called down. "That's where your Mr. Mallister said he'd meet you." Clara's fingers found the worn letter in her pocket, its edges soft from constant handling. She'd memorized every word of Colt Mallister's sparse correspondence. His handwriting had been crude but steady, his words few but honest. He needed a wife. She needed a home. It should have been simple, but nothing about fleeing Boston with Tommy had been simple, and nothing about hiding the truth of her son's existence in her letters felt simple now. She studied Tommy's sleeping face, his dark hair sticking to his forehead. He had his father's eyes, but thankfully nothing else of that cruel man remained in the boy. Tommy was gentle, curious, quick to laugh. He deserved better than back-alley hunger and whispered shame. He deserved a father who wouldn't raise his fists when the whiskey ran thick. The landscape outside had transformed over their 5-day journey. Gone were the gentle hills and forests of the east. In their place sprawled a wild world of red rock, sparse grass, and endless sky. Even the air felt different, thinner, drier, carrying the scent of sage and something untamed she couldn't name. The other passengers had disembarked at earlier stops until only Clara, Tommy, and a traveling preacher remained. "First time in Wyoming Territory?" the preacher asked, his voice kind beneath his dusty black coat. "Yes, sir." Clara straightened her traveling dress, a navy blue wool that was far too warm for the weather, but the finest thing she owned. "Meeting my husband. We're to be married." The words felt strange on her tongue. She'd been married once before, though that felt like another lifetime. Perhaps that woman, the one who believed promises and ignored bruises, had died back in Boston. The preacher nodded. "Many good women come west for new beginnings. The Lord smiles on brave souls." Brave, Clara almost laughed. If he knew the truth, that she'd accepted a stranger's proposal, lied about Tommy, and fled with $17 to her name, he might have called her desperate, not brave. Tommy stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Are we there yet, Mama?" "Soon, sweet boy, very soon." "Will he have horses?" "The man in the letter?" Clara's heart clenched. "I believe so. Ranchers usually do." The stage crested a rise, revealing Bitter Creek Station, a small cluster of wooden buildings huddled against the vastness, like ships on a dry sea. A low adobe building with a corral beside it marked the stop. A few saddled horses stood in the shade, tails flicking lazily. Her mouth went dry. Somewhere down there, Colt Mallister waited, the man who'd advertised for a sturdy woman of good character to share his life on Barren Ridge Ranch. The man who'd written, "I am not given to fancy words, but I promise a solid home and honest treatment." She'd written back, describing herself as a widow of good reputation seeking stability. All true, except for the part she'd left out. She hadn't mentioned Tommy. Fear of rejection had stayed her hand every time. What man wanted another's child? The stagecoach rattled to a stop. The preacher climbed down first, offering his hand. Clara lifted Tommy down, her arms trembling slightly. The station was busier than expected. Rough men lounged in the heat, their eyes tracking her movement with open curiosity. She pulled Tommy close. "Mrs. Whitmore." The voice came from behind her, deep, steady, careful. Clara turned. The man standing there defied every expectation. Colt Mallister was enormous, towering over her 5'4" frame by at least a foot. His shoulders were broad enough to block the sun. A dark beard framed his weathered face, a pale scar cutting through one eyebrow. His clothes were plain but clean, and his gray eyes, cold as a winter sky, held a quiet stillness that made her breath catch. "Mr. Mallister," she managed. He nodded once, gaze flicking to Tommy. Something flickered in those eyes. Surprise, certainly, but not rejection. Clara's heart hammered. This was it. I must apologize," she began, voice trembling. "I should have been honest in my letters. This is my son Tommy. I'm a widow, as I wrote, but I didn't mention." She swallowed hard. "I understand if this changes matters." "Weaken the boy is part of you?" Colt asked quietly. "Yes. He's my son." A small smile creased the corners of his eyes. He knelt to Tommy's level. "Hello there, Tommy. I'm Colt." "How old are you?" "6, sir." "6 is a good age. Old enough to learn to ride if you've a mind to." Tommy's eyes brightened. "Really? Really?" Colt looked up at Clara. "The boy is part of you, so he's part of me now. That's how I see it." Quote. Clara's throat tightened. She'd prepared for anger or dismissal, but not this. Not simple acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need for thanks," Colt said, standing with quiet grace. "We should collect your things. It's a 3-hour ride to the ranch, and I'd like to reach it before dark." He moved to gather their meager luggage, a single trunk and 2 carpet bags containing all they owned. Clara noticed how the other men stepped aside as he passed, lowering their voices. She caught snippets of whispers. "Mallister, that business 5 years back. Surprised he'd take a wife." "Mama," Tommy whispered, tugging her sleeve. "Is he a giant?" "Hush," she murmured, though she wondered the same. Colt loaded their belongings onto a wagon, hitched to 2 sturdy horses, with a beautiful bay mare tied behind. "Can you ride?" he asked. "A little," she said. "Good." The wagon's rough going. The mare's gentle. "Name's Rosie." He lifted Tommy onto the wagon seat with ease. "You'll ride with me, young man. I'll need someone to watch for rabbits." "Rabbits?" Tommy blinked. "Biggest dogs out here. They like to race the horses." Clara mounted Rosie, Colt steadying her carefully but without presumption. They left Bitter Creek Station as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Clara rode beside the wagon, watching Colt handle the team with quiet competence, while Tommy peppered him with questions. The land unfolded before them, rolling grass, red rock formations, distant purple peaks. It was beautiful in a fierce, lonely way. "It's so empty," Clara murmured. "Not empty," Colt replied. "Just honest. Shows you what it is right off. Doesn't hide behind prettiness." She glanced at him, wondering if he meant more than the land. The sun painted the mountains crimson and gold as they crested a final rise. Below spread a broad valley with a creek winding through cottonwoods and, nestled near the bluff, a sturdy log house surrounded by barns and corrals. "Barren Ridge Ranch," Colt said simply. "Home." Home. Clara tested the word silently. It had been so long since she'd had one. Looking at Tommy's bright face and the steady man beside her, she thought perhaps she might remember what it meant. That night, as stars spread across the Wyoming sky, Clara realized that for the first time in years, her fear was mixed with something far rarer: hope. The first week at Barren Ridge Ranch passed in a blur of adjustment and small disasters. Clara had imagined herself competent enough. After all, she'd kept house in Boston, hadn't she? But ranch life was an entirely different world. The wood-burning stove seemed to have a mind of its own, either smoking out the kitchen or refusing to stay lit. The water pump handle required more strength than she possessed, leaving her gasping for breath as she tried to fill a bucket. Even gathering eggs became a battle of wits, with a furious red hen that Tommy had lovingly named Mrs. Angry. At first, Clara thought Colt's silence meant judgment, but over time she realized it was patience. When she nearly wept over a pot of scorched stew, he didn't scold or laugh. He simply showed her how to bank the fire properly, his large hands steady and gentle. "Takes time to learn," he said simply, and ate what could be saved without a single complaint. Tommy, in contrast, thrived. Within days, he was following Samuel, the elderly ranch hand, around like a shadow, learning to feed the chickens and split kindling. The old man, weathered as sun-baked leather, didn't say much. But Clara saw the fondness in his eyes when Tommy trotted behind him, carrying a tiny bundle of sticks. The house itself was a revelation. Built from solid logs and chinked with mud, it was larger than Clara had dared imagine. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and parlor, anchored by a great stone fireplace that could warm the whole house. Real glass windows let in the light. A narrow staircase led to 2 bedrooms upstairs. Colt had given her the larger one, keeping the smaller for himself. Tommy slept on a cot beside her bed for now, though he'd already started asking when he might have a room of his own. "When you're older," she told him, though she secretly wondered about sharing walls with her new husband. She and Colt were legally married. The preacher at Bitter Creek Station had signed the papers, but Colt made no demands beyond decency. Each night, Clara heard his footsteps pause outside her door before continuing down the hall. She couldn't decide if she felt relieved or rejected. Colt remained a mystery. He rose before dawn, worked from sunup to sundown, and spoke little of himself. Yet when he spoke to Tommy, there was warmth in his voice, gentleness in his large, calloused hands that soothed restless horses and children alike. Clara learned about him in fragments. The scar on his brow came from a horse's hoof when he was 15. He'd built most of the ranch with his own hands over 7 hard years. He could read but not write well, and Samuel had helped pen his letters. He had a sweet tooth, though he tried to hide it, his gray eyes brightening whenever she managed a passable pie. On her 8th day at the ranch, Clara ventured into town with Samuel for supplies. Tommy stayed behind. Colt had promised to show him how to curry the horses. Bitter Creek was busier than she remembered. Main Street boasted a saloon, church, schoolhouse, and general store. The moment she stepped down from the wagon, conversation seemed to hush. Inside the store, the proprietor, a thin man with oily hair, smiled too broadly. "Ah, the new Mrs. Mallister," he said. "Vernon Pratt, at your service." We'd heard Colt finally took himself a wife from back east. Boston, was it? Quote, "Yes," Clara said, forcing politeness. "Quite a change, I imagine," Pratt went on. "Though I suppose any change is welcome for a woman in certain circumstances." Before she could answer, a woman emerged from the back room. She was older, with graying hair pulled into a severe bun and a sharp expression. "My wife, Constance," Pratt said cheerfully. "Constance, this is Mrs. Mallister, Colt's new bride." Constance looked Clara over as if examining flawed fabric. "From Boston," she said. "Mail order, I hear." "Yes," Clara admitted. "How practical," Constance sniffed. "Though one wonders why a woman would travel so far for a husband, unless there were complications at home." The implications stung. Clara's fingers tightened around her reticule. "My late husband died of pneumonia. I came west, seeking a new start for myself and my son." "Your son?" Constance's eyebrows arched. "You brought a child. Does Colt know?" "Of course he does," Clara said sharply. "He's been very kind to Tommy." Constance exchanged a look with her husband. "Well, Colt Mallister always was peculiar. I suppose it makes sense he'd take on another man's leftovers." Clara's cheeks burned. Before she could respond, Samuel's rough voice cut through the tension. "Got the supplies loaded, Mrs. Mallister. We best be heading back." She followed him out with her chin high, but inside she felt hollow. The whispers followed her all the way to the wagon. "Don't mind them hens," Samuel muttered as they left town. "Folk here got nothing better to do than peck at newcomers." "They don't seem to think much of Mr. Mallister either." "That's 'cause they're fools," Samuel said. "Colt's worth 10 of any man in that town. They just remember what they want to remember." "What do they remember?" Clara asked softly. Samuel's weathered face tightened. "Ain't my story to tell. But don't you believe half of what you hear. Colt's a good man, the best I've known." They rode in silence after that, the rhythmic clop of the horses, hooves filling the air. When they reached the ranch, Clara saw Tommy perched on the corral fence, watching Colt work with a young black horse. The animal reared, fighting the bridle, but Colt moved with quiet authority, his touch firm and steady, until the horse finally calmed. "He's teaching her to trust," Tommy said proudly when Clara joined him. "Says you can't force it. You gotta be patient and show him you won't hurt him." Clara watched Colt's easy control, the way he murmured to the horse in low tones. Something in that gentleness twisted in her chest. Maybe that was what he was doing with her, showing her she didn't need to fear him. That night, she made her best meal yet: venison stew, biscuits, and an apple pie. Colt ate heartily, even taking seconds. "This is real good," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Thank you," she managed, cheeks warm with pride. After supper, Tommy fell asleep on the rug before the fire. Clara moved to wake him, but Colt stopped her. "Let him sleep. I'll carry him up." She watched him lift the boy with infinite care, Tommy instinctively curling against his chest. The sight filled Clara's heart with dangerous tenderness. Upstairs, Colt laid Tommy on his cot and stepped quietly into the hall. They stood facing each other in the soft lamplight. "Thank you," Clara said, "for everything, for being patient, for accepting Tommy." "No need to thank me," he said quietly. "We're married now. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. That includes the boy." Still, she hesitated. "I know this isn't what you expected when you advertised for a wife." "Maybe not what I expected," Colt said, his gray eyes steady, "but maybe what I needed." He tipped his hat in goodnight and disappeared into his room, leaving Clara standing in the hall, her heart pounding. She'd come west seeking safety, not affection. But as she crawled into bed, she couldn't help wondering, what kind of man was Colt Mallister really? The whispers in town had hinted at violence, a past soaked in scandal. She thought of his quiet voice, his steady hands, the way he looked at Tommy. That wasn't the face of a cruel man. But then, she'd been wrong before. As the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Clara whispered a prayer into the darkness, for strength, for her son, and for the man sleeping just down the hall, who might yet hold both her salvation and her undoing. The weeks passed like the steady beat of a workhorse, predictable yet heavy. Mornings began with smoke from the kitchen stove and the sound of Colt chopping wood outside. Days were filled with chores and small victories. Evenings ended with Tommy's laughter around the supper table. Slowly, Barren Ridge began to feel less like a stranger's house and more like home. Then one crisp evening, Colt surprised her. Tommy had been invited to spend the night with the Hendricks boys from the neighboring ranch. For the first time since arriving, Clara and Colt were alone. After supper, Colt cleared the table without being asked. When everything was done, he hesitated. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him out into the cool twilight. The air smelled of pine and river water. They walked along the creek until they reached a small clearing where a rough-hewn bench faced the mountains, the last light of sunset painting them violet and gold. "I built this for Margaret," Colt said quietly. "My sister, she loved watching the sun go down." Clara's breath caught. "Your sister?" Quote. He nodded. "She died 5 years ago." They sat side by side, the silence between them filled with the hum of crickets. Finally, Colt spoke again, his voice low and rough. "She was just 17. After our parents died, I took work on the Double Bar Ranch. Thought I could look after her, but the ranch owner's son, Robert Dalton, he hurt her." Clara froze. She knew what that meant, even if he couldn't say the word. "Oh, Colt. She came to me one night, crying, her dress torn, said he'd been forcing her for weeks, too scared to tell me." He drew a shaky breath. "I found Dalton at the saloon, called him out in front of everyone. He laughed, said she was just a servant girl who'd been willing enough. I lost control. Beat him near to death before they pulled me off. Should have finished the job." His hands shook as he stared into the dark. "They locked me up. 2 years in territorial prison. While I was gone, Margaret wasted away, wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk. Died of pneumonia, they said, but I know better. She died of shame, because I wasn't there." Clara reached for his hand. "You did what any brother would have done. You tried to protect her." He gave a bitter laugh. "Didn't protect her well enough." "You built this place in her memory," Clara said softly. "She'd be proud." "You're a good man, Colt Mallister." He shook his head. "You don't know me." "I know enough." She looked at him, her eyes shining. "You took in a widow and her son when you didn't have to. You've shown nothing but kindness and patience. I know that's the kind of man you are." Before he could reply, she leaned forward and kissed him. The touch was gentle, uncertain, like testing the warmth of sunlight after too long in the cold. For a heartbeat, he was still. Then his arms came around her, strong and sure, drawing her close. The kiss deepened, full of loneliness and longing, of two lives trying to start over. When they finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "That's not your choice to make," she whispered back. They walked home hand in hand beneath a sky heavy with stars. At the porch, Colt paused. "Your room is yours still," he said softly. "This doesn't have to change anything, unless you want it to." Clara smiled up at him. "What if I wanted to?" That night, the distance between them vanished. They came together with reverence and hunger, two wounded souls finding solace in each other's arms. By morning, the world looked new. In the days that followed, Clara felt lighter, surer of her place in this wild land. She'd found not just a husband, but a partner, someone who saw her worth, and Tommy's too. But peace on the frontier never lasted long. One afternoon, Clara rode into town for supplies. As she stepped down from the wagon, a well-dressed man blocked her path. He had golden hair slicked back and a smile that didn't reach his pale blue eyes. "Mrs. Mallister, I presume," he said smoothly. "Judd Baxter, owner of the Double B Ranch." The name struck her like a spark. Dalton's partner. Colt had mentioned him only once. "Mr. Baxter," she said coolly, trying to step around him. He moved to block her way. "Now don't be in such a hurry. I just wanted to welcome you to Bitter Creek. Fine place your husband's got, though a bit small compared to mine." His eyes swept over her. "A woman like you must find life here dull." Clara's stomach turned. "I find it just right." Baxter leaned closer, voice low. "Funny thing about Colt Mallister, man's got a temper. Heard he near killed Robert Dalton once. Spent time in prison for it. Course that's not all that happened back then. Poor girl, his sister. Some say she wasn't quite the innocent he made her out to be." Clara's blood ran cold. "You disgust me," she said sharply. Baxter smiled. "You're brave, Mrs. Mallister. I like that. Shame your husband's about to lose that ranch of his. He's behind on taxes, you know. Maybe when it's mine, I'll find room for you and the boy. You deserve better than a brute." "Get out of my way," she snapped, her hands trembling. "Such fire," he said with a smirk. "I do enjoy a challenge." A familiar voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Sheriff Morris stood behind them, hand resting on his holster. Baxter's smile vanished. "No problem, Sheriff. Just being neighborly." When he sauntered off, the sheriff looked at Clara kindly. "Best stay clear of that one, ma'am. Judd Baxter's not a man you can trust. And neither is Vernon Pratt. Between the two, they've got half this town under their thumb." Clara thanked him and left, her heart pounding. That night, she told Colt everything. The moment she spoke Baxter's name, his face darkened. "He's been trying to buy this ranch for years. Wants control of the whole valley." "Then we'll fight him," Clara said. Colt looked at her grimly. "He doesn't fight fair." Over the next weeks, Baxter proved that true. Fences were cut, water lines sabotaged. 3 of their best horses vanished in the night. The sheriff claimed there was no proof. Then one morning, Baxter himself rode up the hill with 4 armed men. Colt met him in the yard. Clara stood on the porch, Tommy peeking from behind her skirt. "Morning, Mallister," Baxter drawled. "Brought some news from the county office. Seems you're behind on your taxes. $300 due by the end of the month, or the property goes to auction." "That's a lie," Colt said coldly. "I paid in September." Baxter shrugged. "Funny, no record of that. Maybe you should have kept a receipt. But I'm a generous man. I'll pay off your debt myself if you sign over the deed to Barren Ridge." "Get off my land," Colt growled. "Careful," Baxter warned, his smile turning sharp. "You wouldn't want another stint in prison, would you? Folks remember what you're capable of." "Leave," Colt said again, his voice like thunder. Baxter's smirk faltered under the weight of it. "Have it your way," he said, mounting his horse. "But when the law comes knocking, don't say I didn't warn you." As the riders disappeared, Clara wrapped her arms around Colt. "We'll find a way," she said. "We'll save this place." He buried his face in her hair. "I won't lose you, too." The battle for Barren Ridge had begun. 3 weeks later, the hay barn burned. They managed to save the horses, but their winter feed was gone. Then came the theft of the horses they'd sold to raise money. The sheriff still claimed no evidence. By the final week, they had scraped together $230, still 70 short of what they owed. "I'll go to town tomorrow," Clara said, determination blazing in her eyes. "I'll ask for help." "From who?" Colt said bitterly. "Everyone in that town's in Baxter's pocket." "Then someone has to stand up to him." She rode out the next morning with Samuel at her side. Every door she knocked on closed fast. The churchwoman whispered and turned away. Mrs. Dalton slapped her across the face when Clara dared speak Margaret's name. By sunset, she had almost nothing to show for it. But as she prepared to leave town, a small group gathered, working folk, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, a few others. "We can't give much," the teacher said, pressing a small purse into her hands, "but we believe you." $30. Not enough, but a spark of hope. When she returned home, Colt was pacing the yard, his knuckles bleeding. "Baxter's men came while I was gone," he said hoarsely. "They killed Dog." Clara froze. "Tommy?" "He's safe. But they said next time it won't just be the dog." Something inside her snapped. She had run before, to protect Tommy from one monster. She would not run again. That night, after sending Tommy to the Hendricks for safety, Clara and Colt sat at the table counting their meager savings. "We're still short," she whispered. Before Colt could answer, hooves thundered outside. A young man rode in hard. Pete Morrison, one of Baxter's ranch hands. He looked pale, but determined. "I can't work for him no more," he said, pulling a pouch from his saddlebag. "There's $90 here. Take it. Pay the taxes." "Why?" Colt asked, stunned. "My sister was friends with Margaret," Pete said quietly. "What Baxter and Dalton did to her, they did to others, too." "My, Jenny, she took her own life. I can't undo that, but I can help you stop him." Colt's voice broke. "Thank you, son." They had the money. Enough to pay it all. But as dawn broke, Sheriff Morris rode in with a warrant. "Colt Mallister," he said heavily. "You're under arrest for assaulting Judd Baxter." Clara's heart stopped. Colt kissed her hand. "Pay the taxes," he said. "Save the ranch." They took him away in irons. Clara stood in the doorway as dust from the departing horses settled over her boots, her fists trembling with fury. Baxter thought she'd give up now, but he was wrong. By noon, she hitched the wagon, loaded the tax money, and started toward town. She never made it. 2 miles out, riders surrounded her. Baxter led them, his grin oily as ever. "Morning, Mrs. Mallister. Out for a drive? That wouldn't be tax money you've got there, would it?" Quote. "Get out of my way." He chuckled. "Your husband sends his regards. Had an accident in jail last night. Fragile skull, you know. Shame." "You're lying." "Am I?" he sneered. "Guess you'll find out soon enough. But by then, it'll be too late." Before she could reach for her rifle, one of his men seized the reins. Then a shot cracked through the air. Baxter's hat flew off his head. Samuel stepped from the trees, rifle leveled. "Let her go, Baxter," he said calmly, "or the next one won't miss." But more riders were coming, from the east this time. Clara's heart leapt when she saw Colt among them, bruised but alive, leading Sheriff Morris and half the town. It was over in minutes. Baxter's men surrendered, and the sheriff leveled his badge. "Judd Baxter, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and conspiracy." "You can't touch me," Baxter spat. "I own this town." "Not anymore," the banker said grimly, stepping forward. "We've seen your books. You're finished." Quote. Baxter drew his gun, but Colt was faster. One shot to the shoulder, not to kill, just to stop. As he lay bleeding in the dirt, Baxter laughed weakly. "You think you've won, Mallister. You don't know what I know. About your sister. About you." Colt stood over him, eyes like stone. "I know enough." "You found her diary," Baxter sneered. "Found out she was carrying my child, and you came to my house to kill me, but you couldn't do it, could you?" "Too much of a coward." Colt's voice was quiet. "Margaret wrote about forgiveness, said hate was killing her faster than shame. That's why I didn't kill you then. But I won't let you hurt another soul." Sheriff Morris motioned for his men. "Get him to the doctor. He'll live long enough to stand trial." When it was done, Colt turned to Clara. She ran to him, tears blurring her vision. "You're alive." He caught her face in his hands. "Because of you." That night, the people of Bitter Creek gathered at Barren Ridge, offering help to rebuild what Baxter had destroyed. Hammers rang, saws sang, and laughter returned to the valley. As the sun set, Clara stood with Colt outside their new barn, Tommy asleep in her arms. "You built this place out of loss," she said softly. "Now it's full of life again." He kissed her forehead. "You gave it that." She smiled, leaning into him. "No, Colt, we gave it to each other." And when spring came, with the mountains still capped in snow, the Mallisters of Barren Ridge Ranch, Colt, Clara, Tommy, and the baby soon to arrive, were proof that even in the wildest land, love could take root and grow strong. Sometimes, the hardest journeys led you exactly where you were meant to be.